At 5:06 in the afternoon on May 24, 2011, a tornado forms on the south side of Chickasha, Oklahoma. It is not the largest tornado on the ground in Oklahoma at this moment. It is not the fastest. It is not the one that will set records. It is not the one that will generate the news coverage, the atmospheric science retrospectives, the Wikipedia articles that people actually read. It is the other tornado, the one that formed from a different supercell in a different county on the same afternoon as something bigger and more historically legible that consumed all the available space in the disaster narrative. That distinction belongs to a tornado already in motion to the northwest, a circulation that has just become the first EF5 in Oklahoma since 1999. Carrying winds that instruments will later measure at 295 miles per hour, moving through the communities around El Reno and Piedmont, that tornado will kill 9 people. It will injure 181. It will set a new wind speed record for the Oklahoma Mesonet. It will be the story of the day, competing for attention with the Joplin. Missouri EF5 that is already consuming the nation's disaster processing capacity 2 days after killing 161 people 300 miles to the northeast. The tornado at Chickasha will not be the story of the day. It will barely be a story. It has winds near 200 miles per hour. It will be on the ground for 55 minutes, tracking 33 miles northeast from the south side of Chickasha through the rural communities of Blanchard and Newcastle. It will strip asphalt from a county road in a section 10 feet wide by 100 feet long. It will scour 2 to 4 inches of soil from the earth at its most violent point. It will destroy 72 structures, damage 261 more, injure 48 people, and kill 1, a person in a mobile home in the south portion of the city, where the tornado first touched down at EF2 intensity before it became the EF4 that the landscape northeast of Chickasha documented in soil and bark and stripped asphalt. And it will essentially vanish from the public record. Not because it was unremarkable, because it was remarkable in the shadow of something worse, a shadow that itself was in the shadow of something catastrophic. And because the specific triple burial that Chickasha experienced by the April 27, 2011 super outbreak 4 weeks before, by the Joplin EF5 2 days before, by the simultaneous El Reno Piedmont EF5 on the same afternoon, is a burial without historical parallel in the American tornado record. No event of comparable violence has ever had its public visibility suppressed by so many simultaneous and sequential disasters on so compressed a timeline. Then in January 2025, 3 researchers at the National Severe Storms Laboratory and the University of Oklahoma published a paper in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society and called the Chickasha tornado an EF5 candidate. They argued that the lower bound of EF5 should be adjusted from 201 miles per hour to 190, and that under that adjusted threshold, based on the physical damage evidence at Kitty Hawk Road in Grady County, the Chickasha-Blanchard tornado qualifies. 14 years later, the asphalt had already been replaced. This is the story of what happened at Chickasha on May 24, 2011, and of why it was forgotten, and of what 14 years of subsequent research has established about what it actually was. If this kind of deep, real science holds your attention, take a second to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps. Let's begin. The week of May 28, 2011 is among the most devastating in the modern history of American tornado science. To understand why Chickasha is forgotten, you have to understand the sequence of events that surrounded it. Because no single tornado in history has ever been crowded out of public memory quite the way the Chickasha-Blanchard EF4 was crowded out by events occurring over a span of days, on the same storm system, from directions that no coverage framework could accommodate simultaneously. The sequence begins 4 weeks before May 24. On April 27, 2011, the United States experienced one of the most violent tornado outbreaks ever recorded, concentrated across Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee. That single day produced 36 confirmed EF4 or EF5 tornadoes, not 36 significant tornadoes. 36 tornadoes at the two highest categories on the intensity scale. The outbreak killed 316 people, injured thousands more, and generated the kind of coverage, the aerial footage of mile-wide damage paths through the Alabama suburbs, the accounts of entire neighborhoods erased from the landscape, the specific names of the hardest-hit communities like Tuscaloosa and Hackleburg that became shorthand for the disaster. That dominates national attention for weeks afterward. The April 27 super outbreak is the most violent tornado outbreak in the recorded history of the United States, and was still the dominant story in the weather and disaster narrative when May arrived. Then came May 22. The Joplin, Missouri EF5 struck a city of 50,000 people and killed 161. It was the deadliest single tornado in the United States since the Woodward, Oklahoma F5 of April 9, 1947, 64 years earlier. The 161 deaths in Joplin were accompanied by footage and photographs that circulated globally within hours. The hospital directly hit, the 6-mile swathe of complete structural destruction through a functioning Midwestern city. The search that stretched across days as rescuers worked through debris that reached the foundations of what had been a fully built-out residential and commercial district. By the morning of May 24, 2011, Joplin was the dominant story of the spring tornado season, the dominant story in American disaster management, and the dominant story in the meteorological community's internal conversation about warning time, structural vulnerability, and public response. The weather media was in Joplin. The federal emergency management apparatus was in Joplin. The nation's emotional attention was in Joplin. Into this context, at 5:06 p.m. on May 24, the Chickasha EF4 forms. At almost exactly the same time to the northwest, the El Reno-Piedmont EF5 forms from a separate supercell. Both tornadoes are in the air at the same time. Both are in the same state, Oklahoma, roughly 60 miles apart on the same afternoon, killing people and destroying structures. Any other week in the modern American tornado record, the simultaneous occurrence of an EF4 at 200 MF and an EF5 at 295 MF in the same state would generate weeks of coverage, academic papers, and meteorological retrospectives. On May 24, 2011, it generated coverage of the EF5 and near silence about the EF4. The El Reno-Piedmont EF5 was the first tornado in Oklahoma rated at the highest category since the May 3, 1999 outbreak that had killed 36 people in the Oklahoma City area and produced the famous Bridge Creek Moor F5. 12 years had passed since Oklahoma had seen an EF5. When one arrived, it consumed what space remained in the disaster narrative after Joplin had taken most of it. 9 people died in the El Reno-Piedmont EF5. The Oklahoma Mesonet station at El Reno recorded a wind gust of 151 miles per hour as the tornado passed, a record for the highest wind speed ever observed by the Oklahoma Mesonet. Those are news. The Chickasha EF4 killed 1 person and injured 48 and disappeared into the footnotes of a week that will be remembered for Joplin and El Reno forever. This specific sequence of burial, overshadowed first by the April 27 super outbreak, then by Joplin, then by the simultaneous El Reno-Piedmont EF5, produced a tornado event that is effectively unknown outside the operational meteorology and storm chasing community. Ask any atmospheric scientist who works on Oklahoma's severe weather about Chickasha, May 24, 2011. They know it. Ask anyone else. They do not. At 5:06 p.m. on May 24, 2011, the tornado descends from a separate supercell from the one producing the El Reno-Piedmont event. This is important and often missed in casual accounts of the day. These are not the same storm. Two distinct supercell thunderstorms have organized simultaneously in the same outbreak environment across southwestern and central Oklahoma. One producing what will become an EF5 to the northwest near El Reno, one producing what will become an EF4 to the south near Chickasha. They are fed by the same atmospheric environment, the same extraordinary helicity values, the same Gulf moisture, the same upper-level forcing, but they are independent storms with independent circulations, tracked separately on radar, warned separately by the NWs. The Chickasha supercell was already a documented, warned, radar-identified storm when it produced its tornado. The NW's Norman office had issued tornado warnings before the funnel touched down. People in Chickasha had warning. Some of them took shelter. The fatality, the person in the mobile home in South Chickasha, died at EF2 wind speeds, in a structure that does not provide meaningful protection at EF2, in the approximately 10 to 15 minutes between when the warning was issued and when the tornado arrived. Adequate lead time for a mobile home resident to reach a safer structure is not always available even with a warning. And the specific challenge of mobile home residents receiving tornado warnings and reaching better shelter in the available time is a persistent, unresolved problem in tornado warning science that the Chickasha event illustrates in microcosm. But the warning was there. The warning was issued. The meteorological system performed its function. What the warning system could not control was what happened on the radar screens to the northwest at the same moment. The El Reno-Piedmont EF5 was developing and intensifying simultaneously, demanding attention, generating tracking data, consuming the cognitive and operational resources of the NW's office in Norman. The May 24 atmosphere was producing two violent tornado events at once, and then W was managing both as best it could, while also coordinating with emergency managers and media across an area already sensitized by Joplin 2 days before. The specific operational challenge of a multi-storm outbreak in which two violent tornadoes are occurring simultaneously in different counties is a challenge that the NW's trains for, but that places extraordinary demands on the warning system's capacity. The Chickasha tornado was managed. The warnings went out. The EF4 was in the record within hours of the event. The NW's damage survey team documented Kitty Hawk Road. The 261 damaged structures were cataloged. The one fatality was recorded, and then the news cycle moved on to El Reno's 9 deaths and Joplin's 161, and the April 27 outbreak's 316. And the Chickasha EF4 settled into the specific obscurity reserved for events that happened correctly, but not dramatically enough to break through the noise of the season they occurred in. Chickasha, Oklahoma is the county seat of Grady County. Located approximately 35 miles southwest of Oklahoma City along I-44. It has a population of roughly 16,000 people. A small city that exists in the agricultural and industrial economy of southwestern Oklahoma, with the University of Science and Arts of Oklahoma, a functioning downtown agricultural processing infrastructure, and the residential neighborhoods that surround a county seat of its size. It is not a metropolitan community. It does not have the profile of Oklahoma City or Tulsa or even Norman, which have broader national recognition from their roles in Oklahoma football, Oklahoma City's bombing memorial, or the atmospheric science institutions at OW. Chickasha is a Grady County city that most people in Oklahoma know and most people outside Oklahoma have not heard of. The south side of Chickasha, where the tornado first touched down, is a residential and commercial zone with the specific character of small city Oklahoma outskirts, mobile home parks alongside conventional residential housing, small businesses, agricultural outbuildings, and the mix of structure types that characterizes the edge of a small city transitioning to open country. The mobile home park where the one fatality occurred is the specific kind of housing that the tornado science community consistently identifies as the most vulnerable to wind events at any F rating. Mobile homes are not anchored to engineered foundations, are not designed to resist lateral wind loads at any significant level, and fail catastrophically at wind speeds that well-built conventional homes would survive with only roof damage. The one person who died in the Chickasha-Blanchard EF4 died in a mobile home at EF2 wind speeds before the tornado reached its full violence. At EF2, a mobile home is not survivable. At EF4, the 48 people who were injured were in a variety of structures along the 33-mile path, some of which survived the tornado in damaged form, and some of which did not survive at all. The specific distribution of injuries across structure types and locations along the tornado's path reflects the specific intensity variation that the damage survey documented, EF2 in South Chickasha, where the fatality occurred, escalating to EF4 and near EF5 in the rural sections northeast of the city, then weakening through the later portion of the track. Blanchard, Oklahoma, the community that gives the tornado its second name, is an even smaller community approximately 7 miles northeast of Chickasha, a rural town of a few thousand people surrounded by the farmland and ranch properties of southern McLean County. Newcastle, the third named community in the tornado's path, is larger and closer to the Oklahoma City metro's southern edge. It has grown significantly in recent decades as suburban development has pushed south from Moore and southwest Oklahoma City. The tornado's track through Newcastle in its later and weaker phase produced significant but not catastrophic damage. The 261 structures impacted across Grady County, including 72 destroyed and 46 with major damage, represent the full economic and personal toll of an EF4 tornado through a community without the insurance and financial resilience that a larger metropolitan area provides. Farmers with crops destroyed and irrigation equipment damaged. Homeowners with structures reduced to foundations. Agricultural businesses whose outbuildings and equipment absorbed wind forces that the F scale rates at EF4, but that the BAM's paper says may have been in EF5 territory. The economic damage of the Chickasha-Blanchard EF4 was real, and its recovery was measured in months and years, not the days that the news cycle allocated to it before moving on to the next event in a season that never seemed to stop producing them. The National Weather Service Damage Survey and subsequent academic analysis document incredibly high storm relative helicity values exceeding 500 square meters per second squared across the outbreak area. Storm relative helicity is the specific measure of the wind shear in the lowest levels of the atmosphere that most directly correlates with tornado production and intensity in supercell storms. Values above 300 MSIS are typically considered high for tornado production. Values above 400 MSIS are rare. values above 500 MSIS are the kind of numbers that operational meteorologists who see them describe using language that implies something beyond normal severe weather. The May 24 atmosphere was exceptional. It produced exceptional tornadoes. The El Reno Piedmont EF5 with 295 mph winds was the most prominent expression of that exceptional atmosphere. Chickasha was the second. To understand why an atmosphere this extreme existed over Oklahoma on May 24, you have to understand the specific synoptic pattern that produced it. A strong upper-level trough, an elongated region of low pressure aloft, had advanced out of the southwestern United States and taken on what meteorologists call a negative tilt. Oriented from northwest to southeast, rather than the more typical southwest to northeast orientation. Negatively tilted upper-level troughs have a specific and well-documented relationship with severe weather production. They are associated with especially explosive convective development and with atmospheric configurations that produce the most extreme storm relative helicity values. The combination of the negatively tilted trough providing upper-level forcing, the Gulf moisture streaming northward into Oklahoma providing the moisture and instability, and the wind shear profile providing the helicity values above 500 m/is created conditions that the NWs and research community both describe as prime for violent tornadoes. Two separate supercells developed in this environment in different parts of southwest and central Oklahoma at approximately the same time. Each produced a violent tornado. The northern one near El Reno produced the EF5. The southern one near Chickasha produced the EF4. This is not the common situation of one storm producing multiple tornadoes. This is two distinct storms, both organized to the level of producing extremely violent tornadoes, operating simultaneously in the same atmospheric environment. The May 24 environment's 500 plus m/helicity values are worth dwelling on. The storm relative helicity measure specifically quantifies the rotation that exists in the low-level atmosphere. The horizontal vorticity that the storm's updraft can tilt into the vertical and then stretch, amplifying the rotation as the vortex narrows. The higher the helicity, the more efficiently a developing supercell can generate and sustain tornado circulations, and the more intensity the resulting tornado can achieve. The specific relationship between helicity and tornado intensity is not perfectly linear. Other atmospheric factors matter too, but in the extremes, very high helicity values are associated with the most violent tornado events in the climatological record. The May 24 values exceeded 500 m/s in an environment where multiple factors were simultaneously favorable. The result was not one violent tornado, it was two. The Chickasha supercell, the storm that produced the EF4, was being tracked on radar by the NBU's office in Norman. Tornado warnings were issued. The public alert system worked as designed. The warning lead time was not zero. What happened to Chickasha's south side was not the consequence of a missed or late warning. It was the consequence of a tornado that was rated EF2 in its initial pass through the city, strong enough to destroy mobile homes, severe enough to kill one person in one of those mobile homes, and that intensified to near 200 MIF outside the city, where fewer people and fewer structures existed to document the escalation. As the tornado moved northeast out of the city, it intensified. The character of the damage changed as the storm strengthened, not the gradual ramp of a slowly organizing storm, but the rapid escalation of a supercell that has settled into a high cape, high shear environment and is now running at the top of its capacity. In the rural areas northeast of Chickasha, the survey teams found well-built homes destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. The difference matters. A damaged home has suffered structural impairment but retains its form. A destroyed home has been deconstructed by the wind, walls separated from floors, roofs removed entirely, exterior walls collapsed inward, the building reduced from its functional form to its component materials distributed across the surrounding landscape. Trees in the vicinity of destroyed homes were stripped to stumps, their bark removed completely by the combination of wind pressure and debris impact that operates at these wind speeds. Cars were thrown hundreds of feet from where they had been parked. The EF4 damage indicator that the damage survey formally applied to this portion of the path corresponds to estimated winds between 166 and 200 miles per hour on the Enhanced Fujita scale. And then the tornado reached the section of road called Kitty Hawk Road. The news damage survey for the Chickasha-Blanchard EF4 documents specifically what happened at Kitty Hawk Road. The tornado rapidly strengthened to extremely high-end EF4 intensity with estimated wind speeds of nearly 200 mph. At this location, 10 feet by 100 feet of asphalt was stripped from the road surface, not cracked, not fractured in sections. Stripped, the bound layer of hot mix asphalt that constitutes the paved surface was physically removed from the road base beneath it, leaving the granular base course exposed as if the pavement had been peeled away. The section removed, 10 feet wide by 100 feet long, represents a portion of road surface weighing thousands of pounds. Bonded to its base by the weight of the material and the adhesive properties of the bituminous binder that holds asphalt together. The ground surrounding the road at Kitty Hawk was scoured 2 to 4 inches deep. The topsoil that formed over centuries of prairie grass decomposition and agricultural activity in Grady County was physically lifted and removed by the tornado's circulation, leaving the pale subsoil layer exposed below, the same signature that the 1997 Jarrell Texas F5 produced at 18 inches depth, scaled down but physically equivalent in mechanism. Trees in the Kitty Hawk area were severely debarked, their outer bark removed entirely by the mechanical abrasion of wind-driven debris at extreme velocity, the same process that turns trees into smooth-barked poles in the most violent tornado paths. The specific combination of asphalt stripping, soil scouring, and complete bark removal documented at Kitty Hawk Road is not the standard EF4 damage signature. Standard EF4 damage is catastrophic, homes removed from foundations, cars thrown long distances, trees snapped. But it does not routinely include asphalt stripping or soil scouring of 2 to 4 inches. These are physical evidence signatures that appear in the most violent EF5 damage paths. The 1999 Bridge Creek Moore F5 in Oklahoma, the 2011 Hackleburg Phil Campbell EF5 in Alabama, the 2013 Moore EF5. Their presence at Kitty Hawk Road in Grady County, Oklahoma on May 24, 2011, rated EF4, is precisely the anomaly that the 2025 Liza, Brooks, and Croca paper identifies and formalizes. Here's where the story becomes specifically relevant to tornado science in 2025, and to the broader question of whether the rating scale we use to measure tornado intensity is telling us the truth about what tornadoes are doing. The Enhanced Fujita scale has a specific threshold for its highest category, EF5, corresponding to estimated winds above 201 miles per hour. This threshold was set when the F scale was developed and implemented in 2007 to replace the original Fujita scale created by Dr. Ted Fujita of the University of Chicago in 1971. The development of the F scale was itself a significant scientific achievement. It replaced Fujita's original wind speed estimates, which had been derived from engineering intuitions about structural damage rather than rigorous testing, with new estimates developed through wind tunnel testing and structural engineering analysis. The F-scale is more carefully calibrated to the physics of building failure than the original scale was. But the F-scale made a specific change from the original Fujita scale in how it handles the complete destruction of well-built single-family homes. And this specific change is the source of the tension that the Chickasha event illuminates. On the original Fujita scale, a well-constructed home swept completely off its foundation, its entire structure removed, leaving only the concrete slab constituted F5 damage. The logic was straightforward. If the wind was strong enough to remove a substantial residential structure from its anchoring, the wind was producing something in the F5 range. This was Fujita's specific characterization of what he called incredible damage, the complete and total destruction of a well-built structure, leaving no recognizable remnant at the site. On the F scale, this was the highest category. On the Enhanced Fujita scale, the same outcome, a well-built home swept off its foundation, constitutes EF4 damage. The wind speed range associated with this specific damage outcome was reassessed through the structural engineering analysis that produced the F scale, and the engineers concluded that the wind speeds required to sweep a well-built home from its foundation are in the EF4 range of 166 to 200 MV, not in the EF5 range above 201 MV. EF5 requires additional specific damage evidence, the removal of well-anchored concrete or masonry structures, or the stripping of reinforced concrete features, or other indicators that reflect winds in the range that exceeds what the threshold for swept-away wood frame homes requires. The practical consequence of this change is that the bar for EF5 is higher under the current scale than it was under the original scale. Events that met the F5 standard, houses swept from foundations, meet only the EF4 standard under the current methodology. To earn EF5 under the current scale, a tornado needs to go further than removing well-built homes from their slabs. It needs to damage the kinds of structures that are specifically engineered to resist extreme wind loads. The Chickasha-Blanchard tornado, with its near 200 MV winds, asphalt stripping, soil scouring, and multiple well-built homes swept from foundations, would have been rated F5 under the original Fujita scale. It is rated EF4 under the Enhanced Fujita scale. This specific discrepancy between what the original scale would have called the event and what the current scale calls it is precisely what the January 2025 research paper by Anthony Liza, Harold Brooks, and Mackenzie Croca addresses. Liza is a meteorologist at the National Severe Storms Laboratory who heads the Testbed and Visualization Support Team. Brooks is one of the most respected climatologists of severe convective storms in the world and a professor at the University of Oklahoma's School of Meteorology. Croca is a researcher at O's School of Meteorology. Their combined institutional credibility, SSL and O, the institutions most directly associated with the most rigorous tornado research in the United States, is not a peripheral contribution to this argument. It is the argument being made by the institutions that know this topic most thoroughly. The paper, published in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, places the Chickasha tornado within the broader context of what the authors call the EF5 drought, the period from May 20th, 2013 through the paper's writing in January 2025. As of that date, the United States had gone more than 11 years without an officially rated EF5 tornado. the longest such gap in the recorded history of F-scale or F-scale tornado classification, dating back to the beginning of official records in 1950. This is a remarkable statistical fact on its face. EF5 tornadoes are rare. They typically occur no more than a few times per decade, but 11+ years with none at all, in a period that included multiple violent tornado outbreaks and at least several tornadoes that produced damage evidence consistent with extreme winds, is a gap that demands explanation. The conventional explanation would be natural variability, that the atmosphere simply has not produced EF5 level tornadoes in the years since 2013. That the statistical absence is real and reflects a genuine period of lower extreme tornado activity. This explanation may be partially correct. There are documented decade-scale fluctuations in violent tornado frequency associated with large-scale atmospheric patterns. But Liza, Brooks, and Croca argue that the explanation is also partially methodological. The Enhanced Fujita scale's higher bar for EF5, the change from the original scale's standard, means that some events producing winds in the EF5 range may not receive EF5 ratings, because the specific damage indicators the current scale requires for EF5 were not present in the tornado's path. A tornado that carries EF5 winds across rural farmland with no structures present cannot be rated EF5. Because EF5 requires damage to specific structure types to formally assign. This is the Chickasha problem, extended to a broader argument. The tornado's intensity cannot exceed what the evidence in the path allows the scale to confirm. The paper identifies a set of what it calls EF5 candidates, tornadoes since the Moore EF5 of May 2013, that produced physical damage evidence, or meteorological measurements, or combinations of both, that are consistent with EF5 winds but did not receive EF5 ratings. The Chickasha-Blanchard tornado is among these candidates. Even though it predates the Moore EF5 and therefore predates the EF5 drought itself. The inclusion of the Chickasha tornado in this analysis tells a specific story. Researchers looking back at the pre-drought period, at events that occurred under the same F-scale framework that is currently in use, are finding tornadoes that the scale formally rated EF4, but that the physical evidence suggests were producing winds consistent with EF5. The methodological gap between what the tornado was doing and what the scale could formally confirm is not unique to the post-2013 period. It existed before. Chickasha is a documented pre-drought example of the same dynamic. The paper's specific proposal, adjusting the lower bound of EF5 from 201 inf to 190 inf, is a formal scientific recommendation rather than a simple administrative suggestion. The authors ground this in engineering analysis of what wind speed is actually required to produce the damage patterns that are documented in EF4-rated events like Chickasha. Their argument is that the 201 MFE threshold is set higher than the wind speed at which the most extreme damage patterns documented in EF4-rated tornadoes actually occur. If the threshold were calibrated to the damage evidence rather than to an abstract engineering estimate of structural performance, the lower bound would be closer to 190 mph. At that threshold, the Chickasha tornadoes near 200 mph winds place it in EF5 territory. The official EF5 threshold has not been changed. The Chickasha tornado's official rating has not been changed. What has changed is the scientific community's formal, published, peer-reviewed assessment of what that rating may not be fully capturing. The specific consequence of the EF4 rating is not merely semantic. The EF4 designation places the Chickasha tornado in a category that, in the context of May 24, 2011's simultaneous El Reno Piedmont EF5, reads as the second-tier event from that day. EF4 is strong. EF5 is historic. The El Reno-Piedmont tornado was rated EF5. The Chickasha-Blanchard tornado was rated EF4. In the news coverage and public memory of the event, EF5 is what people focus on. EF4, on the same day with 1 death instead of 9, is what gets forgotten. The 2025 paper's EF5 candidate designation means that the Chickasha tornado may have been functionally equivalent to the El Reno-Piedmont EF5 in its most intense phase, carrying winds in the same range, producing the same categories of extreme surface damage, but was denied the rating that would have placed it in the same formal category because the specific damage indicators the current scale. Requires were not distributed across its path in a way that formally supported EF5 assignment. The rural Grady County farmland northeast of Chickasha did not have enough well-constructed anchored structures in the most violent section of the path to formally document EF5 damage. What it had was asphalt stripped from roads, soil scoured 2 to 4 inches deep, and trees debarked to stumps. Physical evidence that 2 of the most credentialed tornado researchers in the country, looking at it 14 years later, concluded was consistent with EF5 intensity winds. The Chickasha tornado is, in this sense, stronger than the other El Reno tornado, the 2013 El Reno tornado, rated EF3, the one that killed Tim Samaras and his colleagues, and is the tornado this series has discussed in a prior episode. An EF4 with near 200 MF winds and an EF5 candidate designation from the 2025 research paper is, by every metric of the rating system, more violent than an officially rated EF3. The 2013 El Reno tornado was the widest ever recorded at 2.6 miles. The 2011 Chickasha-Blanchard tornado was stronger by rating and potentially equivalent by physical evidence to a tornado in an entirely higher category. You probably didn't know that. This is what the stronger than El Reno framing means. Not the 2011 El Reno-Piedmont EF5, which was happening simultaneously, and which Chickasha cannot claim to have exceeded. That tornado had 295 MF winds and earned its EF5 rating unconditionally. The comparison is to the 2013 El Reno EF3, which became famous for its width and for the deaths of Tim Samaras and his colleagues. The Chickasha-Blanchard EF4, now designated an EF5 candidate, ranks above the 2013 El Reno in the intensity hierarchy of the F scale. The tornado that is remembered produced EF3 damage. The tornado that is not remembered produced EF4 damage at minimum, and the 2025 research says the physical evidence is consistent with EF5. History's attention is not calibrated to intensity. It is calibrated to death tolls, to famous names, to cities large enough to anchor a narrative. Chickasha had 1 death and a familiar name in Oklahoma, and none of the broader resonance that makes a disaster legible to the national media. The 2013 El Reno tornado killed Tim Samaras, one of the most famous storm chasers who ever lived. It became famous partly because of who it killed and partly because of its record width, not primarily because of its wind speeds. The 2011 Chickasha tornado had higher wind speeds and a higher official rating, and nobody who was famous died in it, and the public has never heard its name. The 2025 Liza, Brooks, and Croca paper sits in the scientific record, peer-reviewed and published, making the argument that Chickasha deserves to be called an EF5 candidate. Whether the rating system changes, whether the 201 if threshold becomes 190 if, and the official record is revisited, is a question for the institutional processes of atmospheric science. What is already established is the physical evidence at Kitty Hawk Road, the stripped asphalt, the scoured soil, the debarked trees. The nearly 200 MV winds documented by the NW's damage survey, that evidence was there in 2011. It is in the record. The researchers found it in 2025 and called it what the physical evidence suggested it was. The ground at Kitty Hawk Road has been repaved. The asphalt is back. The soil has recovered. The farmers in Grady County have moved through 14 growing seasons since May 24, 2011. The community has rebuilt, as communities do. The tornado was real. The winds were near 200 miles per hour. The rating was EF4. The physical evidence per the 2025 paper is consistent with EF5, and almost nobody knows the name Chickasha in the context of the tornado that moved through it at 5:06 p.m. on May 24, 2011, the afternoon when Oklahoma had two violent tornadoes in the air simultaneously, and the smaller one had near 200 imp winds, and the larger one got all the coverage, and the one 2 days before that had killed 161 people, had taken the rest. In Grady County, the Chickasha tornado damaged or destroyed 261 structures along its path. The news survey documented 72 homes and businesses destroyed, 46 with major damage, 143 with minor damage. The one fatality, the person killed in the mobile home in South Chickasha's early EF2 pass, is the tornado's solitary entry in the death toll. The 48 injuries range across the full spectrum of tornado-related injury, from broken bones and lacerations to the kind of debris impact trauma that structures failing at 200 MCP produce in the people inside them. The community of Chickasha, in the days following May 24, began the rebuilding process that tornado-damaged communities always begin: the insurance claims, the debris clearing, the structural assessments, the decisions about whether to repair or demolish. They were doing this while the nation was focused on Joplin's 161 dead, and while the memory of El Reno's 9 dead was still fresh. And while the April 27 super outbreak's 316 dead was still only 4 weeks old. There was no national attention available for Grady County's 261 damaged structures, and 1 death. There was nothing left over. The damage survey teams from the NWs did their work. The radar data was archived. The surface observations were logged. The atmospheric science community noted the event in the appropriate journals. And the Chickasha-Blanchard EF4 of May 24, 2011 settled into the specific obscurity that competent documentation without public attention produces. Accurately cataloged, fully recorded, and essentially unknown. The 2025 Liza, Brooks, and Croca paper places the Chickasha event in a broader scientific context that extends beyond the specific question of its rating. The paper's central argument is about what the EF5 drought, 11 plus years, without a formally rated EF5, actually means. The authors contend that the drought is partly real. The United States has not had a confirmed EF5 tornado since Moore in 2013. But they also contend that it is partly an artifact. The F-scales methodology, as currently calibrated, sets a higher bar for EF5 than the original Fujita scale set for F5. And some events that would have met the F5 standard do not meet the current EF5 standard even when their physical damage evidence is consistent with winds above the EF5 threshold. The specific gap between the two scales, the change in how a home swept from its foundation is classified, is the technical driver of this argument. Under the Fujita scale, swept-away homes were F5. Under the F scale, swept-away homes are EF4. In the years when Fujita was the active rating standard, tornadoes that swept away homes were classified at the highest level. In the years since the F scale took over, the same physical outcome produces a lower classification. The apparent drought in EF5 tornadoes may partly reflect the reclassification of this specific damage type, rather than an actual reduction in the occurrence of extreme tornado events. Chickasha is the specific case the paper uses to illustrate this argument. An event where the physical evidence, asphalt stripped, soil scoured, homes swept clean, was documented by the NUBU survey and is now being analyzed through the lens of the 2025 research. An event that in 2011 was rated EF4 and in 2025 is being called an EF5 candidate by researchers at the National Severe Storms Laboratory and the University of Oklahoma's School of Meteorology. This is not a fringe argument. These are mainstream institutions. The NSSL and OW, and the paper appeared in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, the flagship publication of the primary professional organization in atmospheric science in the United States. The argument is peer-reviewed and published. It does not change the official rating. It does change the scientific context within which that rating is understood. The EF4 label on the Chickasha-Blanchard tornado is accurate within the current framework of the Enhanced Fujita scale. The EF5 candidate label is the scientific community's increasingly formal way of saying that the current framework may not fully capture what happened at Kitty Hawk Road in Grady County, Oklahoma. On the evening of May 24, 2011, globally, the question the Chickasha event raises, what does it mean when the rating scale and the physical evidence are in tension, is not unique to the United States. Every country that rates tornadoes or severe wind events using a damage-based scale faces the specific challenge that the Chickasha event illustrates. Damage-based rating systems can only rate what they find, and what they find depends on what was in the path. In the sparsely developed sections of Chickasha's rural path, the damage evidence told a story about wind speeds near or above 200 mph. The rating the system formally assigned was calibrated against the damage indicators it could find. The gap between what the wind was doing and what the formal rating process could confirm is the gap that the 2025 paper documents. This gap has consequences beyond the historical record. It affects how tornado risk is communicated to the public and understood by emergency managers. If EF4 is understood as the second highest intensity level, and if communities plan and prepare for the highest expected threats, then a tornado that is actually producing EF5 intensity winds, but is rated EF4, because its rural path lacks EF5-worthy damage indicators, is a tornado that is being communicated as less extreme than it actually is. The shelter guidance for EF4 is the same as for EF5. Get underground, get to the most substantial available structure, so the practical public safety consequence may be limited. But the meteorological culture around risk assessment and the social science of risk communication both depend on accurate characterization of what tornadoes have done and what they are capable of doing. A tornado record that consistently rates some events below their actual intensity is a record that underestimates the atmosphere's capacity for violence in specific environments. The 2025 paper's contribution is not just to identify Chickasha and other EF5 candidates. It is to formally establish, in the peer-reviewed literature, that the methodological gap between the F scale and the F scale has produced a discontinuity in the rating record, a systematic bias toward lower ratings for events that occur in low-density terrain with insufficient damage indicators that should inform how the scientific community interprets the apparent EF5 drought and how the F scale itself might be refined. The refinement the paper proposes, reducing the EF5 lower bound from 201 MV to 190 MV, would not retroactively change the official ratings of past events. It would change the threshold against which future events are rated. It would, if adopted, make the EF5 category accessible to tornadoes that produce near 200 MV winds, with physical evidence consistent with that intensity, even when the most extreme damage indicators the scale currently requires are not present. Whether the National Weather Service adopts this proposal is a question for the institutional process by which the F scale is reviewed and potentially revised. That process takes time and involves input from engineering, meteorology, and emergency management communities. The 2025 paper is the beginning of the formal argument, not its conclusion. But it is published, it is peer-reviewed, and it names the Chickasha-Blanchard tornado as one of the specific cases that motivates the argument. The operational community, the N-doubles forecasters who issue warnings, the emergency managers who coordinate shelter-in-place guidance, the engineers who assess tornado risk for building codes will work through the implications of this research over the coming years. The Chickasha tornado will remain officially EF4 in the meantime. The asphalt that was stripped from Kitty Hawk Road has long since been replaced. The soil that was scoured 2 to 4 inches deep has been covered again by whatever grew back over it. The damage markers that would tell a visitor where the most violent part of the tornado's path was have been absorbed back into the landscape of Grady County, which looks much the same as it did on the morning of May 24, 2011. The record of what happened is in the News Damage Survey, in the Storm Data publication, and now in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society. It is not in the cultural memory of Americans who know May 24, 2011 as the day of the El Reno Piedmont EF5, if they know it at all, and who know the spring of 2011 primarily as the spring of Joplin, the spring of the April 27 super outbreak, the worst tornado season in modern memory. Chickasha is in the footnotes of that season. The 2025 paper argues that it might belong in a different category. At 5:06 p.m. on May 24, 2011, the Chickasha-Blanchard tornado forms on the south side of a city of 16,000 people. It kills one person in a mobile home in the city's south portion. It moves northeast, gains EF4 intensity with winds near 200 MF, strips asphalt from Kitty Hawk Road, scours 2 to 4 inches of soil from the ground, debarks the trees along its path, destroys 72 structures, and dissipates north of the Canadian River at 6:01 p.m. after 55 minutes on the ground. 14 years later, 3 researchers at the National Severe Storms Laboratory and the University of Oklahoma look at its damage evidence and call it an EF5 candidate. They argue that the lower bound of EF5 should be 190 miles per hour, not 201, and that at nearly 200 miles per hour, with asphalt stripped from the roadbed and soil scoured 2 to 4 inches deep, the Chickasha tornado qualifies under that revised standard. The official rating is EF4. The 2025 paper is published and peer-reviewed and names Chickasha specifically. The argument is now in the formal record of the American Meteorological Society. The physical evidence at Kitty Hawk Road was asphalt, and it was on the road until the tornado removed it. The soil beneath the road was 2 to 4 inches deeper before the tornado passed. The trees along the path had bark before the tornado stripped them. These are physical records of what happened, the kind of evidence that does not require a witness account, does not require a survivor interview, does not require a high-resolution radar capture. The tornado wrote its record into the ground itself. The news documented it. The researchers in 2025 read it. To the northwest, on the same afternoon, the El Reno Piedmont EF5 killed 9 people and injured 181 and consumed all the oxygen in the disaster narrative. It was the first EF5 in Oklahoma since 1999. It was the story. To the northeast, 2 days earlier, Joplin had killed 161 and consumed whatever had been left of that season's narrative capacity. 4 weeks before both, the April 27 super outbreak had established the frame within which the entire spring of 2011 would be understood. A catastrophic spring. The worst tornado season in modern American memory. A season so overwhelming that an EF4 with near 200 MIF winds and 1 death in Grady County was always going to be a footnote. The Chickasha-Blanchard EF4 moved through Grady County with near 200 MIF winds and soil scouring intensity and then became that footnote. The scientists found it again in 2025. The asphalt was already gone. The soil had grown back over the scouring. The trees had regrown or been replaced. The community had rebuilt, as communities do. The record survived. In the News Storm Data Archive, in the Damage Survey Report, in the radar data stored at the National Centers for Environmental Information, waiting for someone to look closely enough at an EF4 tornado from a busy afternoon in 2011 to ask whether the physical evidence at Kitty Hawk Road was telling a different story than the official rating. 3 researchers asked. The answer they published is yes. The evidence at Kitty Hawk Road is consistent with EF5. The strongest tornado nobody talks about was real. It was on the ground for 55 minutes. It had winds near 200 miles per hour. The researchers in 2025 called it what the physical evidence suggested. Whether history catches up to Chickasha, or whether the footnotes are where it stays, is a question that the 2025 paper alone cannot answer. But the paper is there. The evidence was there first. The tornado was always real, whether anyone remembers it or not. The ground at Kitty Hawk Road knows what happened. The asphalt that was on the road on May 24, 2011 at 5:05 p.m. was not on the road at 5:07 p.m. That is the simplest possible summary of what the Chickasha-Blanchard tornado did at the peak of its violence. The wind took it. History ignored it. The scientists eventually noticed. The official rating is EF4.